I'm getting very Brian Kobergery vibes here.
So police figured out the identity of the two men responsible for following and killing Dan Markel. And written on the piece of paper is a phone number and the amount of $5,000.
Wow, that's intense. You must follow the law. The law says...
Glorious. Is it a lawsuit? Probably. Why not?
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to Buckle Up, It's the Law with attorney Larry Forman. Folks, today we're going to continue with the opening statement in the Donna Adelson jury trial that is currently happening in Tallahassee, Florida. We left you on a cliffhanger earlier today, and that cliffhanger was, if you remember...
Wendy admitted to police that her brother, Charlie Adelson, had joked that he looked into hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markel.
Wendy, after being questioned by police, was asked, has anyone made any statements in your family about Dan Markel and his potential assassination, his killing? And she said, yeah, my brother, Charlie, made a joke about hiring hitmen and taking him out. That's where we left off. So let's pick it right back up in that moment, in part 2 of the prosecution's opening in the Donna Adelson murder for hire case. Let's go.
Wendy admitted to police that her brother, Charlie Adelson, had joked that he looked into hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markel as a divorce present, but decided to buy her a TV instead because it was cheaper. And what do you know?
Wow.
The same TV that Charlie Adelson bought his sister as a divorce gift would be Wendy Adelson's alibi the morning of the murder. An alibi, the TV repair appointment that was set up by her parents, Harvey Adelson and Donna Adelson, the defendant. So this path of looking into Dan Markel's personal life to see who would have motive to kill him leads law enforcement to the Adelsons, including this defendant, a woman who vowed to never, 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 never give up on getting her daughter and grandsons to Miami, and her son, Charlie Adelson, who told his family that he'd looked into hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markel, as Wendy said, was just a joke. But if Charlie Adelson was just joking about hiring a hitman, that joke, that stopped being funny when Dan Markel was actually killed by a hitman.
Fair point.
While the police are trying to investigate motive, they are simultaneously following that second path of the investigation by tracking down that light-colored Prius the neighbors saw fleeing from the scene. When law enforcement retraced Dan Markel's steps on the morning of his murder, they uncovered some very chilling surveillance video of that light-colored Prius, fitting the description given by the neighbor, following Dan Markel into the Premier Gym parking lot and waiting for an hour while he was inside, and then following him home.
Wow.
From Premier Gym back to Benton Hills. And these surveillance images, coupled with a massive amount of phone and SunPass records gathered in this case, help police track down the exact car used to commit this crime. But police still had to figure out, okay, we got the car, but who was in this car? And why did that person kill Dan Markel?
Right.
So law enforcement did a painstaking review of digital evidence in this case. And when I say painstaking, finding this Prius and finding evidence in these phone records was not an easy task. And it took much longer than your average investigation of a shooting, as you'll hear. But law enforcement eventually found that needle in the haystack. They found a number that communicated with the cell tower that services Premier Gym at the exact time when the Prius was there. And it was a number with a Miami area code. And that number belonged to a man named Sigfredo Garcia. Law enforcement examined Garcia's call logs, and they saw that he was in frequent contact with another number that was present at Premier Gym that day. And that number belonged to a man named Luis Rivera, who is a longtime friend of Garcia, and he's also from Miami. They both are. Police then looked at Garcia and Rivera's phone records, which showed that their phones left Miami 2 days before the murder, so July 16th. They came to Tallahassee, and on the day of the murder, on the 18th, they followed Markel to Premier Gym. The phone data shows that these men turned their phones off just minutes before the murder took place, and their phones then stayed off for about an hour or so after the murder until they were well southbound to Miami. I think around the Gainesville area, the phones turned back on.
This is very reminiscent of like Brian Koberger. I'm getting very Brian Koberger-y vibes here. It's like, well, I'm just going to turn it off right in that moment. But what about leading up to and then, when you turn it back on? Like, you actually make yourself look even more guilty by turning your phone off in the moment of the assassination because you turn it off, he's killed, and then you turn it back on an hour later. Like, come on, dude. It's so stupid.
We got back to Miami.
These people think they're smart.
The bank's ATM camera caught them in the light-colored Prius at a bank drive-thru and caught both of the men in the Prius. So police figured out the identity of the two men responsible for following and killing Dan Markel. But they continued to look for evidence to explain why these seemingly random men came all the way to came all the way to Tallahassee to kill a man that they'd never met.
Right.
What or who is the connection between the killers and the victim? The defendant in her emails obviously had demonstrated ample motive to want Dan Markel dead, but how do we get from these two random and hired killers to her? Well, those phone records that I talked about, they revealed that one of the shooter, Garcia's, most frequent contacts was a woman named Catherine Magbanois. She goes by Katie. The shooter and Magbanois have a long history of an on-again, off-again relationship, and they share 2 kids in common. This is Garcia and Magbanois. And lo and behold, these 2 paths of the shooter's car and the motive, they converge when law enforcement sees that Catherine Magbanois is also one of the most frequent contacts in the phone records of Charlie Adelson, the defendant's son.
Bam.
The same son that she had been nagging to death about his sister being stuck in Tallahassee. Law enforcement also learned that at the time of this murder, Catherine Magbanois was dating Charlie Adelson. So, Dan Markel was a problem the defendant needed to solve. The defendant's son, Charlie Adelson,
and Katie is doing life in prison, I believe.
Was looking to hire a hitman to kill Dan Markel. Dan Markel is killed by a hitman. And who ended up being the hitman? The hitman that killed Dan Markel? Someone with a close relationship to Charlie Adelson's girlfriend, the father of her children. So you can see how both paths, followed by investigators, charted the way to this defendant. Not only by looking into the motive, led law enforcement to the defendant because of her hatred of Dan Markel and her son's apparent efforts to hire someone to kill him, but also looking into that car fleeing the scene led law enforcement to the defendant through her son's girlfriend at the time. So 2 investigations, 1 conclusion. Law enforcement also tried to follow the money in this case, and that was a 3rd way that the evidence in this case pointed to the defendant. Law enforcement reviewed bank records, employment records, DHS-MV records of all the suspects, and saw that in the months after the homicide, Garcia, Rivera, and Magbanois all acquired some big-ticket items. Rivera and Garcia both bought motorcycles and cars. Magbanois got a breast augmentation surgery and later received a black Lexus sedan whose previous owner was Harvey Adelson. Catherine Magbanois' bank records were analyzed, and there was no check ever written or matching cash withdrawal for the car or the breast augmentation. Bank records also showed that Magbanawah's account had a huge spike in cash deposits around the time of the murder. She deposited more money in her account in the 5 weeks after the murder than in the entire year before the murder.
That's huge.
And this was during a time when there was no record of her being employed anywhere. And also, about 2 months after the murder, this defendant added Catherine Magbanawah to the payroll at the Adelson family's dental practice, the one that she kept the accounts for, the defendant
and
kept
Donna's
the accounts
signature is
for.
on it.
And the defendant started issuing her regular checks from their business account every 2 weeks, despite the fact that she did not work there at the time. Magbanawah didn't work there. Law enforcement noticed that each one of the 44 checks that were written to Catherine Magbanawah every 2 weeks over the course of the next 2 years after the murder were signed by this defendant,
Bam.
Donna Adelson. So, the money was talking, but what about the suspects? Law enforcement wanted to know what they were saying. In examining the phone records in this case, law enforcement noticed a distinct pattern of communication surrounding important events or dates in this case. The phone calls always went from this defendant to her son, Charlie Adelson, and then from her son, Charlie Adelson, to his girlfriend, Catherine Magbanawah, and then from his girlfriend, Catherine Magbanawah, to the shooter, Garcia, and then back the other way, like train cars. They only seem to touch the car directly in front and directly behind them. The defendant never calls her son's girlfriend, Catherine Magbanawah, or the shooter, or vice versa. Charlie Adelson never calls the shooter, or vice versa. So, if this is a murder for hire conspiracy, as law enforcement suspects, could it be that the defendant and Charlie Adelson are wisely insulating themselves from the actual shooters by having Magbanawah act as the middleman? Law enforcement decided to launch an undercover operation.
The sting operation.
Designed to clarify who are the members of this conspiracy and how information was traveling within the conspiracy.
Interesting.
Police applied for and received court authorization to listen in real time to the phone calls of Charlie Adelson and Catherine Magbanawah, the people in the middle of this train car. And this is what's known as a wiretap. By this point, though, it was April of 2016. It took about 2 years to do this investigation to find out who was in the car to get this wiretap.
2 years? I had no idea this investigation was taking so long. So Donna Adelson probably thought like she skated by, like she's free and clear for a moment there. For a hot minute, she probably thought she was going to be okay. I mean, she wasn't charged or arrested until 2023 when she tried to flee to Vietnam, as you will hear in probably either in this video or in the next video when we finish the prosecution's opening. Wow, that's intense. I mean, looks like they did a really good job at maintaining everything in like its own bubble, but obviously it wasn't good enough. All right, let's keep going. This is getting really spicy.
Going. So at this point, it's been 2 years, almost 2 years, since the murder. And at this point, in April of 2016, Charlie Adelson and Magbanawah are no longer dating. They've been broken up for over a year. Catherine Magbanawah at this point is actually back together with Garcia. We heard they're on again, off again, and have these kids together. Charlie Adelson has moved on he's had many other girlfriends at that point since Magbanawah. And Charlie Adelson and Magbanawah, though, they are still friends. They remain close friends since their breakup, and they're still in regular communication by April of 2016, even though they're not together anymore. Rivera, the second hitman in that Prius, was in prison by this point, doing time on an unrelated charge. And the defendant is happily taking care of her grandkids all day, every day. So all the members of this conspiracy have presumably gone on with their lives believing they've gotten away with murder. So what reason would they have to be discussing the murder at that point if police are listening in? They wouldn't. So police needed to stage an event that would generate some conversation, some activity between the members of the conspiracy so they could see who the members of the conspiracy were. Their plan was to send an undercover agent posing as someone on behalf of Luis Rivera. He was the hitman who was incarcerated by April of 2016. To walk up to the defendant, Donna Adelson, on the street. There's a fly right in front of me that won't leave me alone. To walk up to Donna Adelson on the street and try to blackmail her for money. Law enforcement refers to this as a bump. So, this undercover agent posing as a blackmailer, and this is an actual picture from the surveillance cameras, that this is the undercover agent passing a piece of paper to Donna Adelson back in 2016. This undercover agent is posing as a blackmailer. He hands the defendant a piece of paper, and on the piece of paper is a news article about Dan Markel's murder. And written on the piece of paper is a phone number and the amount of $5,000. He tells the defendant that he knows the Adelsons are taking care of Katie, and he's basically there to blackmail to get more money out of them or out of her on Rivera's behalf to even things out because he knows they're taking care of Katie. He never says Charlie Adelson's name or anything about Charlie Adelson to Donna Adelson. The defendant then puts the piece of paper in her purse and walks away without ever looking at the piece of paper because she knew exactly what it was about. Then law enforcement listens in to see what will happen next. Will the defendant go straight to the police to report the blackmail? Or will she do something else entirely? And as suspected, based on the previously observed communication pattern, the first person that this defendant calls is Charlie Adelson. Despite the fact that the blackmailer never mentioned Charlie Adelson to her. On that first call, you would think the first thing that Donna Adelson would say to Charlie Adelson is, "Oh my God, it's so crazy. Some man just came up to me, handed me an article about Danny's murder, and he's demanding money from us." But she never says any of that. In fact, the defendant never says Dan Markel's name at all. Instead, she tells Charlie Adelson that she needs to talk to him in person about some paperwork that was just delivered to her. She said that it involves the two of us. And that
so you probably have a general idea what I'm talking about.
You should know what she's talking about. The defendant and Charlie Adelson continue talking, and she says that he should bring cash to their meeting. And she says, the TV is probably about 5.
Wow. They think they're speaking in code, but the reality is they're just so bad at it. Bring cash with you. The TV is 5. Yeah, obviously it's code for bring $5,000 with you because we got to pay these people. We're being blackmailed by, Riviera and what's his name. But wow, this is so bad. This is looking grim.
It tells Charlie Adelson that the man who approached her mentioned an ex-girlfriend. The defendant never says which ex-girlfriend of Charlie Adelson. She never says Magdano's name to Charlie Adelson in that phone call. She only says that the blackmailer mentioned an ex-girlfriend. Charlie Adelson never asked his mom, my ex-girlfriend? Which ex-girlfriend? He's had a lot. He never asked that. Because as the evidence will show, he didn't need to. He knew the TV is probably 5 meant that she was being blackmailed about Danny's murder, where the TV was the alibi, and he knew that the ex-girlfriend in question was the only ex-girlfriend that he had solicited to find a hitman for him, Catherine McBanois. And we know that because after this call with his mother, the defendant, Charlie Adelson, calls Catherine McBanois. He does not call his most recent ex-girlfriend or even the one before that. He calls Catherine McBanois.
Directly.
And his call to Catherine McBanois is the only call he makes to any ex-girlfriend after getting the information from his mother that the blackmailer mentioned an ex-girlfriend.
Wow.
And he hadn't dated her for about 1.5 years at that point. And although they threatened to do it very often, neither Charlie Adelson nor the defendant ever reported this attempted blackmail to the police. You all will hear the calls between the conspirators, and as you listen to these, you'll notice that they're being very cautious about what they say. It's apparent that they're being very careful about the words they use because they are all immediately suspicious that law enforcement could be behind the bump. Law enforcement could be the person who came up to them on the street and gave her the paperwork, and law enforcement could also be listening to their conversations. After Charlie Adelson's first call to Catherine McBanois, Charlie Adelson then meets up in person with his mother, the defendant, and in person she gives him the paperwork that this blackmailer gave to her and makes it Charlie Adelson's newest problem to solve.
Wow. Wow. The plot thickens, folks. The plot thickens. And I think this is an excellent spot to break. And we will finish this opening statement by the prosecution tomorrow afternoon. And we will conclude with the defense's opening tomorrow evening. So, folks, I wanted to thank you all for joining. This is getting crazy. This is crazy. I hope you all learned something. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye, everybody.